Hey everyone, and welcome to After Hours. In tonight's video, we're going to be taking a look at our fourth and final episode in the Flamenco Panel series by Northcott. In this episode, we are going to be diving into the borders, sashing, and looking at some of the negative space along with the background quilting. So let's head over to the machine and check it out. So back over here at the quilt, we're going to start doing the leaf border first that goes counterclockwise. I'm not 100% sold, again, on doing something in these 1.5 inch sashings right just yet. I want to see how the poof works out between them. Again, changing designs on the go. This is kind of what we do. But I know I want to stick with doing something in the leaf border with that green variegated thread. So I've got my ultimate marking pencil and my 4x8 ruler template because I will be doing that 45-degree angle like we talked about in the planning episode. So I do want to have that from point to point. So outer corner point to inner corner point. And I'm drawing that 45-degree line here, and I'll do it on the other side as well. And what that's going to do is that kind of just gives me my spot to know where I need to start curving feathers to work a little bit more, or any type of design that you're doing. If you're coming up to a corner, it gives you some type of idea, okay, I need to do something else in this section so you don't stray too far into the corner and not have a good way to turn it. So I've got that one started, and I'm going to start for this feather. I'm going to start right here, right at that 45-degree line, right on the vein. And the way that you'll see that I'm stitching it is I'm going to use the vein of the leaf, or more, I guess this is the stem of the leaf here, or the vine. There you go, that's the word. The vine of these leaves. I'm going to use that as the vein of the feather. So we'll work all the way down this section. We'll travel back down that vine, and then we'll add our feathers on top. You can do your feathers however you choose, however you want them to work better, whatever works easier for you. Just through planning this out, I found the least resistant path is to travel all the way down, using that vine as something to touch back to as you work all the way through this. Travel back down the vine, and then continue back through the top of it. So come over here to this section, right there on the vine, pull up my thread. Again, using that green affinity variegated that we have. And I'm just going to start this process. Again, this is 14 stitches per inch for this one. Trying to keep that consistent throughout the quilt. So we'll start it up, curve down towards that 45-degree line, and then back up to the vine. Close to that sashing, to the vine. To the vine. To the vine. And this variegated thread looks just like the leaves and the vine, so it's really hard, and it doesn't take away, excuse me, that's what I'll say, it doesn't take away from the actual leaves and vines themselves. It just adds to it. Once your feathers start getting really long because the vine's getting further away, give yourself a little tiny feather and then add in another one. Gives it some depth and dimension, some movement, and keeps the vine from being so long. Again, tall veins, so give yourself some little baby feathers here to fill that section in. And then a big one. Again, getting close to that 45-degree line that we have drawn. So you want to start preparing yourself for how you're going to arc that feather to kind of get in here. So I'm going to give myself a couple of baby feathers here. Let's do one more. And then the next one will be a big feather to fit in that. So that kind of fits in that droop, and then the next one that you meet up with it would follow right over that and basically touch it and look like it naturally curved right around that corner. So I'm going to travel back down the vine of this to create the vein of the feather. Once I get back to the beginning, I'm just going to take a quick pause, mental break, and this is where I'm going to start beginning the feathers on the top. Now this top one has to reach out into that corner, so you're going to give yourself a nice swoop out. and then a good turn. Same thing, kind of coming back and touching that vine as you work through it. This one's got a big dip here, kind of in the valley of it, so give yourself a couple of small ones. And then one big one comes around to kind of close that out. So we're coming up here to our 45-degree angle. Giving ourselves some feathers. Getting one off into that corner. And finishing out our corner right there. So you can easily work through that section all the way across, and then you would roll and then just go as you need to. There's no specific like feather size, you kind of just make them as you go. So you could work around this entire thing. Since you have the majority of it stabilized, you could roll, feather this down this section, roll back, and then feather up the right hand side to finish that portion off. So I went ahead and finished the border around the entire quilt, the feathers that went all the way around. And since we have the variegated green thread already on the machine, I thought I might as well go ahead and roll to the middle and do our leaf work real quick. So we're going to go over what we did in the first episode when we were designing it. We're going to keep this design. So we're going to start at the base of the leaf. For these, and remember, if they have the little spikes in them, we're doing feathers. If they just have the straight line, we're going to give it just a natural vein on that one. We are tying and burying our threads throughout this process, like we looked at last week. So make sure you leave yourself plenty of tail when you pull up your thread. Start with our needle in the down position. And you can put as small feathers, big feathers, completely whatever you want. Maybe if you kind of switch up the sizing around, it gives the eye a little bit of interest to look around. So we're going to start this up, and we're going down with the flow of the leaf. Tuck in one more, and travel back. So we put those there. You could have them come back to that same point, or you could just make them pull separate sections. So let's try what it would look like if we switched up how it looked. Again, leaving plenty of a tail so we can tie and bury, probably a little bit more than that. There we go. Trim this thread real quick. And then we'll bounce up to the next one. So I'll start here, pull up my thread. Plenty of a tail on that one. And hold our top. Needle in the down position. And this one we're going to go just like that. So this is just a quick pop them in real fast. Not a whole lot of time in between these. It takes more time to pull up your thread and trim than it does to actually do the quilting of the feathers that are going to be in there. Again, leave yourself plenty of tail if you are tying and burying. If you're not, just make sure you're tying off properly. So we'll leave those over there. Uh-oh, got a little loop. And then for this one right here, we're going to be doing the vein work. So I can start wherever I'd like. Let's say I want to start right here. Grab that section. And then for here, I'm just going to come up through the center to the point, back to create a little bit of a vein. And then we'll go out and out. Out. And out. And I'm making these look a little bit more fractured. They're not perfectly straight because all those leaf veins really never are. And then we'll come up there. I did that initial vein and then I did that overstitching on top of it just to give it a little bit more texture and dimension on that. So you can bounce around all your different designs for your leaves all the way around your quilt, and then we get to move on to the sashings. I just finished all of the leaves and I'm back at the top of the quilt rolling back and forth, and now I want to go ahead and start working on these little tiny sashings right in here. So I'm going to be going with the heart design that we went with in the first episode, and so it's just going to basically have that's more or less the repeat of this, and the hearts are going to go back and forth, up and down, just like that, and we're going to do it through the sashing portion here, and we're going to be using the First Kiss Glide for that. That's the color choice that we went with for it. Now, to give us our best chance of perfect spacing throughout the sashing when doing something like this, I'm going to be using my Designs with Lines stencil. I'm going to be doing a 1-inch stencil. This is stencil number 2291, and I'm going to lay that label side down on the quilt. And little pro trick here is the label has perforated holes for your pounce powder to go through. So you're going to line up one of the lines with your vertical sashing, and then once you have that done, because your machine has a kind of a hopper presser foot on it, if you hover over one of those perforated holes and lower your needle down into it, you don't want to actually go through the actual stencil, but you can go through the hole that's part of the stencil and pull back just a hair, and that's going to hold it against your needle. Not enough to break the needle by any means, but it helps you stabilize the stencil when you're pressing down the powder so it's not sliding around. So we're going to give our pounce powder a little hit and then just brush it right across. And with that machine helping us hold the stencil, it doesn't move, which is great. We can pull our needle back up, and there's our lines. So then you can match up the stencil lines on the pre-powdered pieces and keep that spacing going all the way throughout. Once you have that set all the way you want it, sometimes the powder comes down a little bit thick, so you might have to brush or blow some of the powder away. Give a little bit of a brush, a little bit of a pat. Again, this all brushes off when you're done, but you don't want it bouncing all over the place in the middle of your quilting either. So we're going to start down here at the bottom in this inner corner. Grab our thread and pull up our thread. Just like that. And I'm going to start my heart pieces. So I'm going to come in with the corner section. I'll do a heart that goes out 45 into the corner. Like that. And then what we're going to do is try to keep one of those hearts within each of that 1-inch spacing. So we're going to come here and I'm going to start with the up section and then down. So heart. You might have to swing it a little bit to get the real motion, because you want to swing it out wide to get that heart in there. And it takes a little bit of practice, but the fun part about it is you can really make this look super duper different as you work around this. Just like that. And if it's your first time doing a heart design like that, you could set off some fabric to the side to get a good movement of the heart as you're working all the way through. Just like the outer border, I would go ahead and complete your inner and outer sashings all the way around. And then we're going to come back and do the interior negative background space of this quilt. Now, I'm going to actually leave my outer sashing blank, because if I have my binding over that as well, it's going to give this outer one just a nice little poof and a cool little variation of color to frame this. And I'll just be quilting the inner one. Now, for time purposes, I'm going to skip the sides, but I would recommend doing all of that at one time. and then rolling back and then starting on your background section. So I rolled up a little bit, and we're going to now take a look at the background quilting that we're going to do. I'm going to do some cross hatching in this background section. We went back to our micro quilter thread, super duper thin for that background, and I'm going to be using my 2-inch line stencil number 2142 to create a 2-inch crosshatch for this. So I'm going to line up my stencil just like we lined up for the inner sashing. I'm going to line up with my stencil. And once I have that set exactly where I want it, I'm going to give my pounce powder a hit and then brush this across, doing all of it that I can. And I'm even going over the flower pieces as well, just doing everything that I see. That's my first set of lines. I'll give my powder another hit and then line up the next section. And I'm going to work a row of this at a time. So I'm actually going to set up my whole row first with my powder and everything like that, so I can help determine kind of where my spacing is going to end up being for this section. So all the way across this, giving it a hit and moving as we go, just like that. So I have a little bit more on either side for the lines. They don't get right in the ditch on this one, pretty close, but not right in it. And it does that same thing on the right side as well. So we'll kind of have to factor that in whenever we're doing the actual quilting process. So we did our vertical lines. Now I want to turn the stencil horizontal, match up the lines with the sashing, and powder this way. And I think you're getting an idea of what we're up to. We're creating a grid work to do our crosshatch. And that's going to give us our 2-inch crosshatches. Again, setting up the line, keeping yourself as straight as you can, and brush. Good. All the way down to the right. I know you can't see it, but I'm just still brushing all the way down as we went. So I've got my micro quilter thread in. I've got my ruler base on, and I'm going to be using my 4x8 template. You could also use the 4x12 to have a little bit of a longer go with it. I just like the 4x8 because it fits my hand nicely. Just like we learned about a second ago with the sashing, sometimes the powder comes on a little heavy, so give it a nice pat, or you can blow it off. I'm just going to give it a nice pat so I don't have any excess popping up in my way. And this all brushes off later. For the pink one, if you use the white powder, it will iron off. So if you have the white one, that'll help with an iron off. Now that we're all set, we're going to grab our ruler, take our machine over. I'm going to start up in the upper left corner, and I'm going to grab my thread. Now this is super duper thin, so feel free to take your time with this whole section to see exactly where you're going, where you're headed. Doing black on black or white on white or anything like that can sometimes be a little harder to do, so don't be frustrated with it. Also, I'm going to do needle down on this one, and I'm not going to be tying and burying my threads actually because it's so thin. I'm just going to kind of jolt back and forth over one another to tie it off, because we'll have to be jumping from part to part as we cross over these flowers. So you'll just do a little jolt back and forth to tie off, and then you'll pull up your thread and then move across your applique to your next piece. I'll grab my ruler, get a good idea of angling for this from my first square, and I'm going to go from that top left section all the way up and down to this point. We're just kind of going in line sections and working our way through this. So set that up, start up our machine. When you get to your first point, you can stop with your machine and the needle down, shift your ruler, get a good angle on where direction you want to go, about like that. That looks good, and start it back up. I'll stop in that point and then come down again once more to meet up with my flower. Now again, we're not doing a tie and bury on this because the thread is so thin. So when I get to the applique piece, I'm going to jolt back and forth a couple of times to do my tie, stop my machine, and then pick up my thread. And then I will follow down that line to where I would need to come out, which would be right here. So I will drop my needle down that angle, take my ruler again, and I'm about to hit a little cross line right here. I know it's probably harder to see on camera, but I'm about to hit a cross line right here, so I'll do a little bit of a jolt, pause, and now that I've gotten to my bottom line, I'm going to start going 45 degrees to the right. And you'll work your way through this, kind of moving around. You'll have to pick up your thread, you'll have to trim and bounce back and forth, but it's going to give you a beautiful crosshatch look by the end of it. So now we're going to head up to the right section, right about there. Do a little bit of that jolt, and then when I get to that feather, jolt to tie, lock it, pull up our thread, and bounce to the flower where we're coming out of, right there. Needle down, start with the machine, jolt it into our first point, and then take your ruler, and you're just going to work your way all the way through this. With this one having so much applique piece, it's a lot of back and forth, but if you have kind of like a full-on open quilt where you only have to do this a couple of times, it's a pretty fast process, and it creates a beautiful finished look for this section. And all those threads that are left behind as we go, we're just going to trim them away once you're done. Just wanted to give you a closer up of how that crosshatch is looking in the negative space. It's super duper duper cute. So as you work through your row, what you'll be doing is then lining up your stencil down the quilt and doing the same technique, and then they'll just butt up right where they are to create a nice seamless crosshatch in the background. Last but certainly not least, we're going to finish out the background quilting between the arch stitch in the ditch and the stitch in the ditch that we did around the outside spikes here. So I'm just going to bring up my thread. And because it's super thin, like we talked about with the cross hatching, just do a quick little jolt for your tie off. And then this one's just going to be some tight micro stippling to really make that flower pop. Only rule with stippling or micro stippling is try not to get into a pattern, don't cross over, and no points. Other than that, you can do whatever you want. Micro stippling is going to allow you to get really into those nice tight sections. And also move around nicely.
Wasn't that so much fun? Thank you so much for joining me over the course of these 4 episodes as we took a look at the planning stage, where we drew out some of our initial designs on our sheet protectors, the preparation stage, where we took a look at what battings, thread, and fabric we'd like to use, and these last 2 episodes where we looked at the different quilting styles, from stitch in the ditch to changing up your design and stitching in the actual applique pieces, and then borders, sashings, and background quilting like we took at tonight. I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I did. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all things Linda's Electric Quilters, and I'll see you next time here on After Hours. Bye!